All right, looks like everything's going as it should. Everything seems to be in order. So we're ready to get started. I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. This is, by my counting, our sixth class in the FBI. I know this has been a different FBI than we've done before, and appreciate everyone bearing with us and everyone going with us. Like I say, we're at the halfway point. So we're going to look at this for next 6 weeks, continue what we're doing. And then, like I say, we'll see about reevaluating once we get to that point for our next quarter of what we're going to do. But again, I appreciate everyone bearing with us and doing what they can to help us make this a success, as great of a success as it can be by being here every week. And also appreciate, you're going to notice that my setting is a little different this week. We've got some things going on at the church building here, some work being done, and they're sort of outside. They were outside earlier. They may be gone by now, but that's why I'm in my office instead of at the usual table. So hopefully next week we'll be back to our usual spot and we'll be back there. Again, just appreciate everyone bearing with us and helping us as we figure all this out and continue to make this work. So let's get started. We've been talking about the Old Testament. We're talking about specifically the book of Genesis and looking at the idea of the book of Genesis and its outline. We have spent last few weeks going through this. Last week, we got through Abraham, Isaac, talking about their life, the outline of their life, and that's what we're going to pick up tonight, is following with Jacob's life. Now, you'll remember we got to talking about Jacob. We got to chapter 27 and 28 of Genesis last week, where Isaac blesses the wrong son. He is tricked. We talked about that, what it was done to Isaac and caused him to bless the wrong son. And so when he blesses the wrong son, you remember that when Ishmael hears this blessing, that Jacob has stolen his blessing, then he is upset and he threatens to kill Jacob. What's interesting is when we read the scripture, we find out that Rebekah overhears this plan that Esau has, that he's going to kill his brother. And so Jacob, being Rebekah's favorite, she has to find a way to get Jacob away. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we're told up to this point that Isaac is on the verge of death. He's about to die. And Esau says, I'm going to wait till my father is dead. And after my father has died and after we have buried him and mourned for him, then I'm going to kill Jacob. So Rebekah realizes that she has some time to save Jacob. And the interesting about this is that once this whole interaction is over, I forget the exact years, but Isaac lives another, I think, 15, 20 years after this encounter, that Isaac comes back to somewhat of a good health. And so this worry seems to be deflated by that of getting Jacob out in a hurry. But they do that knowing what they knew. And so Isaac calls Jacob to himself, and Isaac gives him that call of the same that Abraham gave him, and that was to find a wife, but do not find a wife from here. Instead, find a wife from the area of Padan Aram. This is where Abraham and his family descended from, where they began their journey. And so he tells them to go back there. And we know the story fairly well. If you know the Bible account, Isaac tells him to go. Rebekah sends him and tells him to go to her father's house and find a wife from that house. It's very interesting. Sort of sad irony here is that Rebekah is the one who really pushes for Isaac to go and pushes for Isaac to find this wife from her father's household. But the sad reality is, and the irony of this, like I said a minute ago, is that this is going to be the last time we have recorded that Jacob sees Rebekah. He sees his mother, his the favored child. So Rebekah is going to send her son away and never see him again. Now, she doesn't know that this time. She thinks he's going to come back after a few years, but in the scheme of things, this is how it's going to work out. So Isaac tells Jacob to go, and he says, you go to Padan Aram, you go to your mother's people, and you find a wife from them. You go there and find a wife, and then she's going to, you can carry on the bloodline. Remember, that's what Abraham told Jacob or Isaac, and told the servant that he didn't want him to marry a Canaanite. That's the same idea of what Jacob is. Now, the interesting thing we find about Esau is that Esau does marry a Canaanite, and then he marries an Ishmaelite when Isaac sends Jacob away, thinking that's what Jacob want, or that's what Isaac wants. When Isaac says that's not Isaac's plan at all. But in chapter 28, verse 3 and 4, we see Isaac gives the blessing of Abraham to Jacob. He gives Jacob, he passes down the blessing that he was given by that was given to his father, that was given by God, and then God confirmed it to Isaac. Now Isaac passes that blessing on to Jacob. And then a very few verses later in chapter 28, verse 12 through 15, God comes to Jacob and he confirms that the promise of Abraham and the promise of Isaac is also going to be upon him. This is that famous Jacob's ladder dream, where he sees that ladder or that stairway that extends from heaven to earth, and the angels are going up and down, and you have God at the top of it, and God speaks to him. Remember that God tells him, Jacob tells him that if he'll protect him and look after him, he'll be his person, he'll be his follower, that he'll make him his God if he'll bring him back safely to this point. And then we see Jacob leaves there, and as Jacob leaves to go back to his father's household or his mother's household, he runs into Laban. And when he's there, when Laban finds out who he is, he willingly takes him into his house and begins to deal with him. Then you remember the story goes from there, is that Jacob sees Rachel, and she is the younger, more beautiful daughter. For some reason, whatever reason he is, Jacob is infatuated. He is hung up on Rachel. And so he agrees to work for Laban for 7 years. For 7 years, he works for Laban, and that's his payment, is to one day be able to get his daughter. Now, this is typically what's called a dowry, that kind of idea of giving the father of the bride payment, and Jacob coming in here with no money, no possessions. This is the best he can do. Well, you know the story. He goes, serves for 7 years. The night of his wedding, he goes in, and after his wedding, and the idea is probably that he may have had some to drink. He may have not been in his right mind. And so he goes into his wife and lays with her, and come to find out next morning he wakes up and it's not Rachel. It's Leah that's in bed with him. And remember, Leah's the older daughter. And again, she was said to have weak eyes. There was something about Leah that wasn't fully there. And so Jacob is furious, and Jacob gets up the next morning, and he goes back to Laban and demands Laban take Leah back and give him Rachel. And then you remember this little sub point. Laban then comes to him and says, well, our practice is not to give the younger daughter away before the older. And it says, if you want the younger daughter, here's what you can do. You do the wedding week with this daughter, and then you can marry my other daughter and pledge to work 7 more years for me. And that's sort of where Jacob winds up setting up, and where Jacob is situated. That Jacob marries the older daughter. He has the wedding party, the wedding feast, typically in their days, lasted for a week. Then after the week was over, he turns around and marries Rachel. And then after he marries Rachel, he agrees to work for 7 more years. And in this process of also marrying these 2 daughters, he's also going to eventually marry or have their maid servants be his second wives, they'll call them, of Bilhah and Zilpah. This is the 2 handmaidens. And if you remember the story, this comes down because what we see in the next few chapters is the birth of Jacob's sons. And so Jacob, as a result of these 4 wives, comes to bear 12 sons and 1 daughter. Now, some will question how many daughters he had, but we're only told of 1. Over and over again, it's repeated there's 1 daughter. That 1 daughter is given by name. So this is who gave him who. Now, you remember the first part is Leah is the first wife. She begins to bear sons. She bears Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And she bears 4 sons fairly quickly to Jacob. And so Jacob is blessed with sons. And Leah sees this, and she's happy, and she begins to hold this over her sister's head. Rachel sees this, and she's not happy. Rachel is not happy with her with Jacob. Therefore, she demands Jacob give her a son. And Jacob says, am I God? I can't do that. And so what happens is that Rachel gives him Bilhah to be a second wife. Now, the way this would work in their world is that if a wife had a servant, she could give that servant to her husband to bear children. And if that servant bore children to her father or to her husband, then those children were considered the children of the first wife. So what these are Rachel getting children in substitute of being able to physically bear them herself, very similar to what Sarah does with Hagar. We see that story. We talked about that last week. About that may sound odd to us, but that was not an uncommon occurrence in their time. And so Bilhah is given to Jacob, and she begins to bear sons. Then after a while, Leah sees that Bilhah gives two sons to Jacob, and not to be outdone, she gives Jacob Zilpah. She gives Zilpah to bear him more sons, and she bears two more sons. Then after that, Leah begins to bear children again, and she bears him Issachar and Zebulun. And then finally, Dinah is born into this family. Then after that, we finally see Rachel is finally able to give birth to a child, and that first child is Joseph, and the second child is Benjamin. These are the two children that become Jacob's favorite, and they're going to become the two that are going to play a major role as we get, or at least one of them is going to play a major role as we get closer to the end of this chapter, this book. So here, Jacob has been blessed with Laban. Not only has he been blessed with Laban, he also, before we get to things on the screen, he also works for another 7 years for Laban. Remember, he promised, he told Laban that after 7 years were over for Rachel, that he needed payment. He works out a deal with Laban that Laban will pay him for every speckled, spotted, and striped goat and lamb. They will go to Jacob, and the others are black lambs. So go to Jacob. The rest will go to Laban. And what basically happens is that God blesses Jacob. Jacob tries some things. We're never told they're successful, but God blesses Jacob, and Jacob's able to have a great fortune, have a great herds. And a matter of fact, he realizes, and his wives realize, that their father has held them back. Now that Laban is trying to prevent them from accomplishing their goals. So Jacob goes to his two wives, and he says, look, I'm ready to go home. We're going back to Canaan. And he sort of sees what their reaction is. And both of them says, yes, our father has done you evil. He's done you bad. Let's all go back. And so they all travel back. You remember Laban comes after them. They have that interaction with the idols where Rachel has stolen Laban's idols, and Jacob swears nobody has, but Rachel hides them. Until after Laban's gone, Laban goes back and tells Jacob, they set a marker, and they set that spot. Jacob says, I'll go no further than this spot in war to come after you. You come no farther than this spot to come after me. And so they make this peace agreement. Well, that's one of Jacob's obstacles. The other obstacle is that as Jacob returns home, is that Jacob has to meet Esau. Now, it's been 20 years since Jacob's been home and since Jacob's had to deal with Esau. And so he's worried about how Esau's going to take this. Esau's had 20 years to nurture this hatred, to develop this despising of Jacob. And so Jacob's worried. As a matter of fact, Jacob sends people to prepare to meet Esau, to try to make this as best possible, because he sends out messengers to see where Esau is, to tell Esau he's coming. And Esau meets him with what Jacob has told is 400 men. That 400 men come out to meet him. And so Jacob's afraid this is going to be a war, that Esau's bringing his tribe, he's bringing his men, they're going to fight Jacob and his men, and Jacob's worried about that. And so what happens is in chapter 32, after he finds out Esau's coming, Jacob sends everybody across the river, except he stays behind to pray. As he prays, he wrestles that night with an angel. And you remember that angel wrestles with Jacob, and there's question if this angel is an angel or the angel of the Lord. It could be God in the flesh, maybe coming down at this time. No matter what it is, the angel and Jacob wrestle all night until finally the angel says, you've got to let me go. I've got to be gone before dawn. And then Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so the angel blesses him with the name Israel. The name Israel means you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. And so there Jacob gets this blessing of a name change, just like Abraham did. And then not only that, in verses 9 through 12 of chapter 35, God confirms this name change. God confirms and confirms this Abrahamic promise that Jacob was given. Now, before we go ahead to our next slide of Joseph, you remember when he does meet Esau after this interaction, he meets Esau. Jacob sort of divides his family up. He puts the handmaidens and their children in the front, Leah in the middle, and Rachel and her children in the back, and he goes out front to meet Esau. The idea is that probably if he thinks Esau's going to attack, then Rachel and her children are going to be able to get away quicker than the others. So he sort of shows favoritism with this. But you remember Esau meets him with the big hug, and Esau tells him he's glad he's come back. Esau has forgotten or forgiven what has happened to him. And so it's a great story of what happens with Jacob when he returns home. And then Jacob begins to settle in the land of Canaan. And as he settles there, again, this is that God confirming the promise and God confirming the seed promise and confirming his name is now Israel. Now, from there, we get to the next character. We get into the story of Joseph. And as we get to Joseph, we're going to see that in Genesis 37, through the end of this book, is going to be about Joseph. You remember in chapter 37, Joseph is mentioned as being the favorite of his father. He has that multicolored tunic, and his brothers hated him because of it. This was a way to make the child stand out. And again, the idea in their world was most tunics, most clothes were white, brown, tan, some easy color because the fabric and the dye to make colors was very hard to come by. It was very expensive. And so for Joseph to have this coat, and again, exactly what kind of coat this was, we don't know. But the idea is that this coat made him stand out. This coat made him stand apart from everyone else. And so Joseph is number one, hated by his brothers because his father's favoritism. But on that, Joseph doesn't help matters himself either because Joseph has some dreams. Joseph has these two great dreams. The first dream he has is that him and his brothers are out working in the field. Remember, they're gathering together their sheaves of wheat. And as they gather their 12 sheaves of wheat, all the wheat stands up. And then Joseph says in his dream, all the other sheaves bow down before him. They fall down before his sheaf. And Joseph sort of tells this dream, again, with what intention, we don't know. But the implication is that Joseph's dream is that being one of the youngest sons, and the youngest son that's able to be out and do this, Benjamin's too young at this point, is that Joseph is going to be the head of the others. Then a little while later, Joseph has another dream. The second dream he has in this one is not just the sheaves of wheat, but he dreams of 11 stars and the sun and moon bowing down before him. Now, again, the sun and moon here is going to be his father and his wife. This is not Rachel. You'll remember Rachel has died by this point, and she has been buried because Benjamin's born, but is his father's wife, which has been Leah. And you remember that in the first dream, Jacob sort of laughs and says, "Oh, that's good, that's fine, that's okay." He brushes off what the other sons are upset about. But yet for the second dream, Jacob sort of calls Joseph out on it and says, "How dare you? You can say your brothers will bow down before you, but say that I'm going to bow down before you. That's taking a little far." And Jacob sort of takes a little offense at Joseph's dream. But that the dreams sort of just go by. And what happens next is that the brothers begin to plot against Joseph. The brothers begin to plot about how they can take care of Joseph, the favorite, the one they're having troubles out of. And it's a very interesting story what they do with Joseph, because we know this. And one of the things that's always been interesting about this is the idea and the thought of whether or not Jacob actually knew how his sons felt about Joseph. Because, and I say that because of this, because you think about it, what father, if you know your sons are having some issues, you know your sons are fighting, your sons are not happy with one of the other brothers, what father is going to send that son out by himself to go be with these other 10 brothers? But this is what Jacob does. And you remember Jacob sends Joseph to go check on his brothers. He goes and checks on them, and they're at a different field from where they originally were. They're up closer to the north. I forget exactly where they're at, but they're up north further than where they were, where they told their father they would be, because they ran out of fields to feed the sheep. And they begin to see Joseph in a distance, and they begin to plan and plot about what they're going to do to Joseph. And in that plotting, they come up with a plan. They're going to kill him. Let's just kill him and get rid of him. And so they make this plan to kill him. And as they make this plan to kill him, that Reuben says, well, let's just throw him in a pit. So we're not guilty. We don't physically hurt him. Let's throw him in one of these pits. Now, the idea of these pits were big holes in the ground, where during the wet season, and there'll be places to feed, to water the animals and water for the people. But this time, probably in the summer, this pit was dry. And so they say that we're going to throw him in this pit. These pits were about 6 to 8 feet deep, typically. And so they throw Joseph down in the pit. And as they throw Joseph down in the pit, it says the brothers go off a little bit and they begin to have a lunch. They have a meal. And that's always an interesting thing to think about, that as Joseph is in this pit, probably crying for help, asking for someone to look after him, his brothers are within earshot and they're not listening to him. They're just making their own merriment and having a good old time. And when they're going, they're further north. The reason this plays an important part is when you look at where they are near a major trade route. Because when you look at the ancient map, there's a major trade route up north where the Ishmaelites would travel a certain road and they would go down near the coast and then head south to Egypt. Now, what happens is they see this band of this caravan full of people coming. And you know the story. They begin to talk among themselves. Judah takes the lead, and Judah says, here comes the Ishmaelites. Why should we kill Joseph and not get anything out of it when we can sell him? We can sell Joseph and we'll come out better. And so Reuben's the one who said put him in the pit, because Reuben had the plan that after the brothers left, he'd come back to the pit, save Joseph, and he'd be his father's hero. Reuben disappears for a while. We don't know where, but Reuben's not here when the brothers make this deal with the Ishmaelites, and they began to sell Joseph. And they sold Joseph for what probably was a pretty good profit. The price of slaves in their time was pretty significant. So they sell Joseph. After they sell Joseph, they have to come up with a story for Jacob. They have to find some way to explain this. And so what they do is they take a goat or a lamb and they slaughter it. They take Joseph's coat, they rip his coat up, they dip it in the blood and let the blood dry and take it back to Jacob and show him the coat. And basically what they do is, I say here in the note, they tell their father. They really don't tell their father what happens. Instead, they really just give it to their father. And when you look at the scripture, you see Jacob sort of makes an assumption. Jacob sort of assumes what he thinks happened, what he believed would happen. And the brothers just sort of let that go, let that be what Jacob believes, and they don't correct him. And so time passes on. And so the story of Genesis, as we said, has shifted from the story of Jacob to the story of Joseph. Now, in between this is chapter 38. Chapter 38 is a very interesting story about Judah and Tamar. That is an interesting story. We won't cover that tonight because of the quickness of what we're looking at, but that chapter is very interesting in that how it ties into the lineage of Christ in Matthew chapter 1. But in Genesis 39, we pick back up the story of Joseph. And what we find out in all of this, that God is with Joseph. God is with Joseph, so that whatever he does, he prospers. And so first we see Joseph coming into the land of Egypt. He's sold into the house of Potiphar. As he's in the house of Potiphar, we know that he begins to take care of Potiphar's house, and Joseph is put in charge of everything. Everything up to Potiphar's wife. And you know the story. When Potiphar's wife sees Joseph, he is this young, rugged, handsome man, probably around the age of 17 or 18. And that's where most people date him at this time. As he has been in this house, the wife sees him and she is physically attracted to him, and she tries to make advances of Joseph and tries to get him to lay with her and to sleep with her. And again, in the ancient world, this was not unheard of. And what was unheard of was for the slave to refuse to lay down with the master's wife. There's some recordings in history of slaves being put to death because they refused their master's wife. And so we know the story. I hope you know the story. that Joseph goes in one day to work and all the people are gone except Pharaoh's wife, or Potiphar's wife, and she calls him into her room. And she entices him to lay down with her. She grabs him by the coat and the jacket. He married Joseph in such a hurry to get out of this. He tells her he's not going to sin against God and against man, against his master. So he comes out of his coat and he runs away. Well, Potiphar's wife takes this and twists it. You remember, she begins to tell her husband and tell the servants that Joseph come in to lay with her, and she had to scream and scare him away. And so Joseph is arrested and put in prison. Now, again, when Joseph gets put into prison, he's also under God's control. And this is an interesting thing, under God's care, because God continues to bless Joseph, and Joseph is again placed in charge of the prison. And while there, he meets two men. You remember, he meets the baker and the cupbearer, and they both have a dream. They've both been sentenced here, been put in this prison by Pharaoh. The baker, they both have a dream one night. The baker has a dream of 3 piles of bread on his head, and he's bringing it to Pharaoh, and the birds come down and eat it. The other man dreams of 3 vines and about how the grapes were, to press the wine and make wine for Pharaoh, and gets the servant to Pharaoh again. And Joseph tells the cupbearer what this dream means. In 3 days, you'll be restored to your position. Pharaoh's going to put you back where you were. To the baker, he says in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift up your head too. Now he tells the cupbearer, he's going to lift up your head in service, put you back where you are. To the baker, he says he's going to lift up your head physically, meaning he's going to behead him. 3 days later, Pharaoh has a birthday, and on this birthday, Pharaoh puts the cupbearer back into his position of service, and he beheads the baker. And so when the cupbearer is set free, the cupbearer tells Joseph, I will remember you, and I will speak kindly of you before Pharaoh, and I will get you out. Well, the cupbearer gets out, and he forgets Joseph. A few years pass, I believe it's 2, and the Bible will tell us that Pharaoh finally has a dream. Pharaoh has a dream that no one can interpret. No one can understand. All the wise men of Egypt are called, everyone's brought forth, and no one can tell Pharaoh what this dream means, and it troubles Pharaoh. It troubles Pharaoh so much that Pharaoh is downtrodden, he's stricken, and he begins to wonder what's going to happen. And as this time passes, the cupbearer comes to Pharaoh and says, well, there was a guy in prison who interpreted my dream. And so he calls for Joseph, and Joseph is brought to Pharaoh. He's cleaned up, put in new clothes, he's shaven, and he comes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, you can interpret dreams, and Joseph says, I can't interpret dreams, but God can. If he will let me, God will help me give this. And this is the interesting thing, is here Joseph was in a position where Joseph could have took the credit for himself and tried to say, look how great I am, how wonderful, how powerful, how knowledgeable I am. But instead, he gives glory to God. He says, it's by God that I can do this. And then Joseph tells Pharaoh the dream and interprets the dream, And you remember, this dream is 2-part. He dreams of 7 cows coming out of the Nile. You remember, he sees 7 fat cows come out of the Nile, and they begin to graze on the ground. And they are fat cows and healthy cows. Then he dreamed of 7 more gaunt cows, 7 more skinny cows. Some translations will say their bones are showing, and they come up out of the Nile too. But these 7 skinny cows come to the 7 fat cows, and they eat them, they devour them, but they don't get any bigger. And then you remember the other vision, the other dream was of grains of heads of wheat. He dreamed there were 7 heads of wheat on a stalk. Those 7 heads were very healthy, were very full. Then 7 skinny, unhealthy heads grew, and those unhealthy heads devoured the healthy heads, and they didn't grow either. And so Pharaoh goes to Joseph and says, what does this dream mean? And Joseph says, well, here's the dream. The dream is that there's going to be 7 years of abundance, and then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And so Joseph says, here's what I would do. He gives a recommendation to Pharaoh. Again, we're not sure if this is a recommendation that God has inspired him to give, or if this was just an insight into who Joseph was, how smart he was. He says, lay by for the 7 years of abundance. Everybody's going to have bumper crops, as we would call them. He says, when everybody has the 7 years of bumper crops, he said, you take part of that crop and you put it in a storage building. You put it in storage cities. And then at the end of those 7 years, when the famine hits, you use that grain to to feed people the next 7 years. And so this is what Pharaoh does. Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of his cities. He puts Joseph right under himself. Joseph is second in control. He also gives Joseph a wife, and Joseph bears 2 sons. And Joseph is well-to-do. Well, in Genesis 42, we see Joseph's brothers come to him for food. Joseph's brothers come to him. They come from Canaan to Egypt because Egypt's the only one who has food. We read that text. It says there's no one else in that area that has food except Egypt. And Egypt has not enough food for Egypt, but also enough food for the surrounding areas. And so Joseph's brothers come to him, but as they come to him, they don't recognize him. We sometimes see this and say, wait a minute. If I were to go somewhere, I think I would recognize my brother. Yes, you may have, but I very seriously doubt any of us have been where it's been 10 plus years since we've seen our brother. In this case, it's been over 10 years since these brothers have seen Joseph, because the 7 good years have come. The 2 or 3 years during the jail and being in Potiphar's house and jail has happened. Plus, we don't know how many years the famine's been in there anyway. The famine has probably been in place a year or two for Jacob to run out of food. So you're looking at Joseph being a teenager when his brothers last saw him, to being a 30-year-old man. And not only that, Joseph has also changed the way he dresses and changed the way he behaves, in that Joseph has went from being a Hebrew to being an Egyptian. And the Egyptians look very different than the Hebrews. The Hebrews were ones who always grew their beard out, and they still do in that region today. They were the shepherds, the outside men. The Egyptians were clean shaven. They were very proper. And so Joseph would look very different after 13 years being in Egypt. He began to look like an Egyptian. And so the brothers come to Joseph. They don't realize who Joseph is, but Joseph recognizes them. And so Joseph puts them on trial. He begins to question them. You remember, he calls them in. He asks them who they are. He accuses them of being spies. They tell him they're not spies. They were sent here by their father. They are 10 sons. When they say there's 10 of us or 11 of us, and one is no more. But we're all the sons of one man. We live in Canaan. We have come for food. And Joseph repeatedly accuses them of being spies, until finally he tells the people to let him go. But he tells them that if you come back, remember there's 11 of them that come, or 10 of them that come. He says if you come back, you've got to bring Benjamin. And not only that, he makes Simeon stay behind as well, as proof that these brothers will come back with Benjamin to prove they're not spies. Well, when Joseph sends them back, they give their money to Joseph and his people to pay. Joseph commands his men to fill their sacks full of grain and then put the money back on top of it. And remember the brothers, they leave Joseph, they leave Egypt, begin to head back, and partway back, they stop for the night, they check their bags, they find the grain on top of the money. And some commentators have said this is very interesting, in that this is twice that the brothers have come into contact or have left Jacob, come back to Jacob without a brother, but yet they've come back richer. When they came back with the time with Joseph, they came back with more money. Here they come back with not just the grain, but also the money as well, and without Simeon. And so they go back and tell Jacob what's going to happen. Remember, Jacob says, nope, we're not going back. I'm not sending Benjamin. I don't trust him. Remember, Reuben says that you can take Benjamin, or you can take my 2 sons and I'll bear witness of Benjamin. And Jacob refuses. Then in chapter 43, we see the famine gets worse and Jacob has to go back. Jacob's family has to go back to Egypt this second time. And in going back the second time, Jacob is told Benjamin must go. Remember, Reuben gave him a pledge that he'll let Jacob have his 2 sons or kill his 2 sons in payment for Benjamin's death. But Judah steps up and Judah says, here's what I'll do. He said, you can take me. He said, if I fail to bring Benjamin back, he says, you can kill me. I'll give my life in Judah, in Benjamin's place. And what we see here is a beautiful picture of what's going to happen throughout the rest of Genesis. Is we see the leader of Judah step up. And this is going to play into chapter 49, where Jacob blesses all the brothers. But Jacob finally gives in and says, okay, you can take Benjamin. And they can take Benjamin and prove all the brothers are not spies. Then go down there, get their brother, and come back. Well, Chapter 44, they go back. Joseph, in chapter 43, Joseph throws a big feast when they come back. They eat with him, they drink, they have merriment. The next morning, Joseph prepares to send them out, but this time he not only puts the money back, but this time he puts his silver cup into Benjamin's sack. And then when the brothers leave, Joseph sends his men after them. They accuse Benjamin of stealing the cup. They tell the other brothers, you just stay. You can go on and go. You go home. We just want this one brother. Matter of fact, they refuse to let the brothers come back, but the brothers demand to go back to Joseph, or to Joseph, excuse me. And when they go back, you'll remember Judah makes this impassioned plea to Joseph, not knowing who Joseph is, knowing his Pharaoh's servant. He makes this impassioned plea to let his brother go. And here we see this flip, and we talk about this on Wednesday night here at Fulton. You see this flip in the story because Joseph is testing his brothers. At the time that the brothers sold him into slavery, let him go to Egypt and have to suffer all this alone, here they have the same opportunity with Benjamin. They can let Benjamin go back to Egypt and not be guilty of it, not have any problems with it, but they refuse to let Benjamin go. And this shows Jacob that the brothers have changed. This shows Joseph, brothers have changed, that they have matured. And so they go back to Joseph, and Judah begs Joseph to not take Benjamin, but to take himself, take Judah in Benjamin's place. And finally, Joseph makes everybody leave in chapter 45 except the brothers, and he reveals himself to them. He reveals himself to the brothers and says, it's me. I'm the one you sold. I'm the one you've given away, and now I'm here to protect you. And then he says that what he's done is he has told them that what's going to happen is that he wants them to come live with him. And Pharaoh receives this news and also tells Joseph, get your family and bring them down to Egypt. And God comes, and they go back. The brothers go back with this big procession of carts and donkeys, and they go back to Canaan. They get Jacob and tell Jacob, Joseph is alive and he wants you to come see him. And what's interesting in chapter 46 is that Jacob is getting ready to go back, but Jacob's torn. Because earlier in his life, he wanted to go to Egypt, and God told him not to go to Egypt. And so Jacob wonders what he needs to do here, and God comes to him as a vision in the night and tells him, Jacob, go back. It's okay. As a matter of fact, he promises him, you're going to go back to Egypt. And when you go down to Egypt, you're going to not only see Joseph, but Joseph, you're going to live with Joseph. And when you die, Joseph is going to close your eyes. In the ancient world, this was a great blessing that the oldest child was responsible for, was to close their parents' eyes when they passed. It was a great comfort to them. And so Jacob receives these words with encouragement, and he goes on his way. And so the Israelites travel down from Canaan down into Egypt, and they settle in the land of Goshen. And all the people of Israel, the sons of Israel and their families move in, and there's 70 people. In the end of this chapter 47, Jacob, Israel begs to be buried in Canaan. He says, don't bury me in Egypt. Take me home. Take me back. And he lists the tomb, the very tomb that Abraham bought for Sarah, the very tomb that Isaac and Rebekah is buried in, the very tomb where his wife Leah is buried. Now, this shows a very interesting thing that some have questioned, and I wonder too, of Jacob's change of heart, because Jacob wants to be buried with Leah. And again, remember, Rachel's his favorite, not Leah, but he chooses Leah to be buried with. And so chapter 48 and 49, we don't have a screen. Chapter 48, Jacob adopts Manasseh and Ephraim to be his children. That's why later when the 12 tribes are listed, Manasseh and Ephraim are listed because they are the adopted sons of Jacob. They are actually Joseph's sons, but Jacob adopts them, and they become two tribes. Basically, what this does is this gives Joseph, the oldest child's blessing, because the oldest child got a double blessing. Chapter 49, Jacob blesses his 12 sons. He blesses Judah with the scepter, and that's because of what Reuben, Simeon, and Levi have done, but he blesses Judah with the scepter. And that's why we see later in the Bible, when the kings come to fruition, we're going to see this in a few weeks, we're going to see the kings come into power, and those kings descend from the line of Judah. And then finally in chapter 50, the first part of that chapter, Jacob dies. They take him to Egypt or to Canaan. They bury him. Joseph finally dies. Now, before Joseph dies, the interesting thing happens. We'll talk about this when we're done for tonight. Joseph's brothers come to him. They're afraid because now that Jacob's died, they think that Joseph's going to take vengeance on them. Now Jacob's done, that Joseph's going to pay them back for the evil they've done. They beg Joseph not to do this. Matter of fact, they say Jacob told Joseph not to do anything. But it says that Joseph weeps. Joseph is upset over his brothers doing this. And the beautiful thing about this is Joseph says to his brothers, you meant this as evil for me, but God meant it as good. God meant for good to come from this. And he says that God not only saved Egypt, but he saved Canaan. He saved that entire known world, that entire region, because he sent Joseph, because he used what happened to Joseph to be able to make him that leader of Egypt, to interpret the dream and to save the people. And then finally in chapter 50, verse 24 and 25, Joseph calls his brothers to him and he tells them he's about to die. He dies at the age of 110, a well old age in the Egyptian world. And Joseph tells them, make this promise to me. Make this promise that when you die, or when I die, and God comes back and God delivers my people from this land, that you'll carry my bones with you. You'll carry my bones out of Egypt and you'll carry my bones with you back to Canaan. Now, the beautiful thing about this, we see Joseph says this in chapter 50. And about Exodus chapter 15, 16, that area, we find Moses, when he takes the Israelites out of Egypt, guess what? He takes Joseph's coffin with him. And then not only does he take Joseph's coffin, we finally see at the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua, that Joshua buries Joseph in Canaan. And so this beautiful picture of getting this wish. I'll leave you one little bit of information here. The only time in the Bible that a coffin is mentioned, in the Old Testament at least, is right here when it talks about Joseph being buried in a coffin. It talks about Joseph being, again, probably like Jacob was, mummified, and then he was put in a coffin to be buried. Jacob was buried in the tomb or in a cave of his family. And so thus we end the story of Genesis. Next week, we will get into the story of Exodus. We will see the continuation of this great story. I appreciate everyone joining us this evening. I know, again, it's a little different from what we usually do. Hopefully next week we'll be back more to normal. I'm going to give just a minute. If anybody here in our Zoom class has any question or comment, they can ask. If not, we're about to stop our live stream. And again, appreciate everyone being here. Remember, next Tuesday night at 7 p.m., we'll continue this study and we'll pick up in the book of Exodus. All right. Does anybody have any questions or anything before we get off? If not, again, appreciate everyone being here. Appreciate you joining us. And we hope that you have a good week. And we hope to see you next Tuesday night.